Okay, so you're here because you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of things,
Right.
to figure out how stuff works, have those light bulb moments, but without having to like read a whole library, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who has time for that? And for this deep dive, you've given us a fascinating book to explore. Dion Fortune's Machinery of the Mind. And our task, right, is to really mine it, to pull out the golden nuggets about how our minds work. The nuts and bolts of thinking and those principles that end up shaping how we act, how we behave, even how our characters develop day after day.
And I think what's really cool about this book is Fortune wrote it for people just like you. Curious minds, interested in self-discovery. They're not necessarily like psychology experts.
Yeah.
It's meant to be practical, give you a working model,
Yeah.
something you can actually use to understand your own mental landscape.
So what's unique about Fortune's approach here?
Well, I think one of the most interesting things is how she thought in pictures. She actually talks about using diagrams and images to get these ideas across, even in the book itself. So, trying to create a visual blueprint of the mind. And unlike some psychological theories that are very rigid and only come from one specific school of thought, Fortune pulls her ideas from many different sources. She's integrating things. And always coming back to the importance of personal experience.
And that's what makes this so relevant for our listeners. Fortune wasn't just like theorizing in some ivory tower, right? She was actually working with people doing what she called remedial psychology.
Right.
So she saw firsthand how powerful it was to understand these mental mechanisms, how it could make a real difference in people's lives. I mean, even just explaining to someone how their mind works could be a turning point for them. It's almost like having that owner's manual for your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could say she was a big believer in, mental self-care, understanding the basics so you can kind of prevent problems in the first place, having a healthy way of thinking about your own mind.
So in this deep dive, we're going to go into the engine room of your mind as Fortune lays it out. And we'll start with the physical connection, how your mind even connects with your body, how it communicates. Then we'll explore those different levels within your mind, what each one does, what its function is. Then we'll look at how our thoughts, they don't just float around randomly, how they link together, how they form these things she calls complexes. And then we'll look at the basic drives that power us, right? Those instincts. And finally, we'll see how the mind tries to adapt to the world around it, including things like those automatic responses, like repression. So are you ready to take a peek under the hood?
Absolutely. Let's start right at the foundation, with the physical vehicle of consciousness. Fortune is very clear. Your mind isn't just floating around out there. It's connected, deeply connected to your body through this incredible network of nerves.
Yeah, and it's like your body has its own high-speed information superhighway, right?
Right.
And Fortune uses this amazing image. She compares your central nervous system, that's your brain and spinal cord, to a telephone exchange. And your senses.
Yeah.
So that's your sight, your hearing, your touch, your taste, your smell. They're like those phones picking up signals from the outside world.
And then the nerve fibers act like wires, right?
Yeah.
Carrying those signals, those electrical signals from your senses to the central exchange, to the brain, and then back out to the muscles and glands, allowing you to act and react to what you're sensing.
So it's a two-way communication system.
Absolutely.
Input, output. Okay. And the tiny components that make this whole network possible are the nerve cells. What are those called? The neurons, right?
Neurons, yeah.
Each one has the central part and then these branching bits called dendrons, sort of like the branches of a tree, I guess. And then a single long fiber called an axon that stretches out. Now, how do these neurons talk to each other? This is the fascinating bit.
Right. So the end of one axon doesn't actually touch the next neuron's dendron. There's this tiny gap, a synapse.
Yeah.
And the electrical signal has to jump across that gap, sort of like a spark.
So this whole intricate network of these tiny messengers is what allows your body and mind to communicate. This physical setup is what makes all those mental processes possible. So for you, the listener, the key takeaway here is that your thoughts and feelings, even the most abstract ones, are ultimately rooted in this physical network.
Right. And to really get how complex this system is, Fortune takes us way back to the beginning, to the evolution of the nervous system. She starts with those simplest life forms, the single-celled organisms.
Yeah, try and imagine. Just one cell. Just one cell doing everything right. It moves, it finds energy, it reacts to its environment. The ultimate multitasker.
But as life became more complex, as those single-celled organisms evolved into multi-celled organisms, the cells started to specialize.
Right.
So you had some cells just for movement, some cells just for sensing the environment, and so
A
on.
vision of labor.
Exactly.
Right.
And that created this need for coordination,
Yeah.
especially between sensing something like food or danger and then coordinating the muscles to move towards or away from it.
So that's where the sensory motor arc comes in, right? It's
Exactly.
like the most basic functional unit. So a nerve bringing in information, a sensation from a sense organ, connects directly with another nerve that then tells a muscle to move. It's like instant reaction.
Right. But as animals developed more muscles for different types of movement, these single arcs had to connect, they have become more sophisticated, right? Forming loops and all these interconnections. This led to more complex and coordinated actions. And you can think about how your brain can process so many different signals at the same time.
Right.
And then tell different parts of your body what to do. It's remarkable.
Right.
And that layering, that interconnectivity is basically what led to the human brain as we know it.
Okay, so we've got the physical basis, but how does an actual thought get in? How does an idea enter the mind? Fortune talks about a sensation traveling from your eye, let's say, up through a nerve to your brain.
Right.
But then she points out this mysterious part, the part we haven't fully figured out yet. How does a physical signal become a mental image or a thought?
Right. It's still very much a mystery.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. But what's interesting is how Fortune explains the way our minds learn. It's all about association, right? Your mind learns to link certain sensations to objects or situations.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you experience those sensations again, your mind kind of goes, oh, okay, that familiar object is probably present. And it starts to create these mental images, mental models to represent those objects.
Right. It builds a picture of the world based on experience.
It's like an internal representation, right? And how accurate these mental models are, she says, determines how truly we perceive the world. So a good match means you've got a pretty accurate idea of what's out there, and a poor match means you're probably misunderstanding something.
Yeah, your perception might be a little distorted.
Okay, and then there's this process of recognizing something. It's not about encountering something totally new, Fortune says. It's about being able to categorize it based on what you already know. So you compare the new thing to what you already have in your mental filing cabinet, trying to find the right box for it.
Mm-hmm.
She uses this brilliant example of landing on an island and seeing a person you've never seen before. Okay? So you see their movements, their body, their hair, and you automatically start categorizing them. First as a living being, then as an animal because they're moving around, then as human. Why? Because they stand upright, they wear clothes, they carry tools. But what if their skin color is different from anyone you've ever seen before? What do you do then?
You create a new subcategory within that human box.
Right? Exactly. So the next time you encounter someone similar, you don't have to start from scratch. You just put them in that existing subcategory. And that's when you feel like, okay, I know what that is. As Fortune puts it, knowing is essentially successful classification.
It's about finding the right mental pigeonhole, making sense of the world by sorting it into categories.
Okay, so the idea gets in, it gets sorted. Now, how's your mind organized internally? Is it just like this big blob of thoughts and feelings?
Not at all. Fortune is very clear about this.
She says it's organized just like your body is,
Mm-hmm.
with different levels.
Different levels, different functions. And she uses this great analogy of a tank with different layers and filters, like sieves, to explain these levels and how ideas flow between them.
I love her analogies. They're so visual.
Right. So the topmost layer is the focus of consciousness. This is where your attention is right now, which you're directly focused on. But just behind that, there's this other layer she calls the fringe of consciousness. That's where you're kind of dimly aware of other things that are happening around you. Like imagine you're reading a book.
Yeah.
Your focus is on the words on the page.
Okay.
But you might also be vaguely aware of, say, the sound of traffic outside or the feeling of your chair.
Or someone talking in the next room.
Exactly. That's all on the fringe.
It's that background awareness.
And separating these two levels is something she calls the sensor. It's like a sieve that regulates what passes between that background awareness and your direct focus.
It's like a gatekeeper deciding what gets your full attention.
Yeah,
Now, this is so important for concentration, isn't it?
absolutely. The better you can control that filter, the better you can focus. If it's too loose, then all sorts of random thoughts and distractions can flood in. It's like trying to have a conversation in a noisy room.
Yeah, you can't make sense of anything. So the focus and the fringe of consciousness make up what Fortune calls the conscious mind, the part that feels like you, where you do all your active thinking. But this is only part of the picture, right?
Exactly.
There's more going on beneath the surface.
Right behind the fringe is what she calls the foreconscious or the preconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically your memory bank.
Okay.
It stores everything you can remember but aren't actively thinking about right now.
Yeah.
Like, say, what you had for dinner last night.
Right.
Or that fact you learned in school that you haven't thought about in years.
Okay.
And just like between the focus and the fringe, there's another sensor here between the fringe and the foreconscious. And this one allows relevant memories to kind of bubble up into your awareness when you need them.
Yeah.
Like if you're trying to remember a name, you're basically using this filter to pull that information up from your memory bank.
So it's like a search function.
Yeah, exactly. You're searching your memory for the right information. And this is crucial for critical thinking because those recalled ideas help you make sense of new information coming in.
She uses another great analogy here. She compares the mind to a kitchen. Your foreconscious is like your cupboard. It's full of all these ingredients you know are there, but you're not using them all at once.
Right.
And then your fringe of consciousness is like the countertop. It's the stuff you've taken out of the cupboard and are ready to use.
Mm-hmm.
And then your focus of consciousness is the mixing bowl.
Right.
Where you're actually working with the ingredients.
The ideas you're actively engaging with right now.
Exactly. Okay. And Fortune points out that most people think these three levels, focus, fringe, foreconscious, are all there is to the mind.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even aware of what she calls the strange hinterland, the deeper levels. But this is where a lot of modern psychology has really focused its attention.
Right, because that's where things can get really interesting.
Exactly. And that brings us to the lower levels of the mind. Fortune introduces the subconscious, or the unconscious. This is where all those thoughts and memories that you don't have direct access to are stored. It's like the basement of your mind.
Yeah, the stuff that's buried deep down.
Now, there's this debate in psychology about whether every single experience is recorded in your subconscious, like on a film strip. Fortune's a little more cautious. She says that at least the memories that made a strong impression are stored there, and they influence your mental life whether you realize it or not.
Right. Even if you don't consciously remember something, it can still affect you.
Okay, so what stands between the subconscious and the foreconscious? What's the gatekeeper?
The main gatekeeper is this great main sensor, as she calls it, which in psychoanalysis they just call the sensor.
Mm-hmm.
And this sensor is vital for your well-being. It's like this really strong filter, right?
Okay.
If that filter is too loose, all sorts of inappropriate thoughts or upsetting memories can just flood into your conscious awareness.
You'd be overwhelmed.
Totally overwhelmed. But if it's too tight, then your conscious mind can get cut off from all the energy and the vitality that's stored in your subconscious. It's like blocking a river eventually. The pressure builds up and something's got to give.
What's important to remember is this main sensor is different from the other two.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just decide to open or close it.
No, you can't control it directly.
Right. It's more about your overall character, not some conscious decision you make in the moment.
Right. It's more about your deep-seated patterns and tendencies.
The analogy of a library versus a vault is helpful here. Your foreconscious is like a well-organized library. Things are labeled, they're easy to find. But your subconscious, that's more like a vault, a huge archive. You might not go down there directly very often, but what's stored in there, that's the powerful stuff that shapes who you are, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah, it's like the foundation of your personality.
Then we go even deeper to the automatic level, the most remote part of your mind. This is what controls all those essential bodily functions you don't even have to think about. Breathing, your heartbeat, all that stuff.
Right. It's like the autopilot of your body.
And it's fascinating how Fortune points out that things that affect your brain, like an injury, can mess with your thinking, but those automatic functions, like breathing, might stay completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite can happen with spinal cord injuries.
Right.
So the different levels have distinct physical locations.
Different parts of the nervous system doing their own specialized jobs.
Okay, so this automatic mind also governs things like your biochemistry. Your involuntary muscles, your blood flow, your hormone glands. And Fortune notes that this connection could explain those physical problems that have a mental component, like, stress headaches or a nervous stomach.
Yeah, the mind-body connection is a powerful thing.
And even though you're not usually aware of this automatic level, it's still influenced by your general mood and the emotions in your subconscious, which might explain why your emotional state can have such a huge impact on your physical health.
Right. Absolutely. It's like when you get stressed, your stomach starts acting up.
Exactly. Now, Think about this evolutionary timeline that Fortune describes.
Yeah.
She says this automatic mind, this was the first to evolve. Then came the subconscious with its instincts. And finally, the conscious levels, those higher functions. And when your awareness breaks down, like when you're very old or if you're sick, it tends to reverse. The higher functions go first, and that ancient automatic mind,
It's chugging along.
it's like the last one standing. Now, moving past the different levels, Fortune introduces these fascinating things called complexes. She explains that our thoughts don't just stay separate,
Right. No, they naturally link up. They form networks. It's like a web of interconnected ideas.
and she uses this wonderful image of pondweed with its branches spreading out in all directions to illustrate this. So a central idea is like the starting point. Then other ideas, related ideas, branch out from it. So when one thought pops into your mind, it's actually connected to a whole web of other thoughts. Think about your own daily life, how one thought about a particular topic can suddenly trigger a cascade of seemingly unrelated thoughts.
All right. They're not really unrelated. They're just connected in ways that you might not be consciously aware of.
That's a complex at work. And understanding these connections can be incredibly insightful.
It's like a key to understanding your motivations and your reactions.
Now, what's really important here is that these complexes, if you follow them back far enough, they're always connected to one of those basic instincts deep down in your subconscious. And that's where they get their power.
It's that raw emotional energy of the instincts that holds the whole complex together.
She has this great example of the grocer. So his grocery complex, all his thoughts about buying and selling food, everything related to his business that's tied to his self-preservation instinct.
Right, because that's how he earns his living.
And his religious beliefs, those are another complex rooted in his subconscious. And then what happens when he starts thinking about getting married? His grocery complex might connect with his reproductive instinct. How?
Because his financial success will affect his marriage prospects.
Exactly. So it all becomes interconnected. Now, this interconnectedness is key to understanding how memory works. When you remember something, you're basically tugging on one of these threads in a complex, and it brings up related ideas. Even those so-called forgotten memories that are buried in your subconscious, you can still access them if you can just activate the right part of the complex that's connected to them.
Right. It's like finding the right entry point into that vast network of memories.
This is a core idea in psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
So how do these ideas even group together to form complexes?
There are a few ways. The most basic is ideas related to the same topic just naturally become associated.
Right, like birds of a feather.
Yeah. Then there's association by simultaneity. So ideas that enter your mind at the same time can become linked. Fortune gives this funny example of slipping on a banana peel right next to a mailbox.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Later on, just seeing a banana or a mailbox might bring that whole embarrassing memory flooding back.
Right. And then there's association by cause and effect. So, if you touch a hot stove and burn your hand, those two ideas become firmly linked.
Of course, pain is a powerful teacher. And finally, any kind of similarity, even if it's just a superficial resemblance, can link ideas together.
So this is where things can get a little wonky, a little illogical. Sausages reminding someone of Zeppelins, or slipping on that banana peel bringing to mind Niagara Falls, or even like the idea of fallen women.
Yeah, sometimes those connections make sense and sometimes they're just plain bizarre.
That's the subconscious for you. It often operates on these illogical associations, and that's what leads to symbolic thinking. So now Fortune shifts her focus to the energy flow, to those currents of psychic energy. She uses all these different terms for this primal life force, libido, horm, élan vital. It's basically the energy that fuels all living things.
The life force.
The life force, right?
Yeah.
And she says this energy flows into your subconscious, and from there, it gets channeled into three main streams.
The three primary instincts.
Exactly. And what are those? First up, we have the self-preservation instinct.
The most basic instinct of all. The will to live, to survive.
Right. But it's more than just staying alive, right? It's also about thriving.
Exactly. It's about this drive to live more fully, to grow, to achieve.
So that's where things like ambition and the desire for self-improvement come from.
Precisely.
Okay. Second big instinct, reproduction, also known as the sex instinct.
And the main purpose of this one, from nature's point of view, is to ensure the continuation of the species.
Right, to keep the whole show going.
Exactly. And Fortune suggests this instinct often uses the energy that's left over after your basic self-preservation needs are met. It's like once you feel safe and secure, you have all this extra energy to pour into other things like procreation. But it's important to note that for Fortune, it's not just about the biological act of reproduction. The sex instinct is more complex than that.
Yeah, it's about that drive for connection, for intimacy, for a kind of merging with another being.
Right. It's about vitality, rejuvenation, that kind of creative spark that comes from union.
Okay, and finally we have the social or herd instinct.
This one is all about those natural tendencies we have for cooperation and social interaction.
Hmm.
You know, wanting to belong, to be part of a group.
Right, and she points out that not every animal has this, right?
Not at all.
A solitary creature like a cat, they're perfectly happy on their own.
But for humans, who are highly social animals, this herd instinct is essential.
Right, we need it to survive and thrive. And she stresses that these three instincts are always interacting.
They're constantly playing off each other within your subconscious, shaping your personality and your social behavior.
But to really get these instincts, you have to see them from nature's perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Not just our own little individual viewpoint. Fortune argues that their focus is on the survival of the species, on the big picture of evolution, not just whether you or I make it.
Right. It's about the continuation of the line, not just the individual.
And this is a really important shift in perspective because it helps us understand why we do the things we do, even if they don't seem to make sense on a purely personal level.
It's like sometimes we're driven by forces that are bigger than ourselves.
And she also challenges that idea that humans are primarily rational beings.
Right.
She says, actually, instinct is often the main driving force, the motivator, and reason.
Reason is often just a tool we use to get what our instincts want.
Right. It's a means to an end. And it's also important to remember that these instincts aren't just physical.
Mm-hmm.
They express themselves on emotional and intellectual levels, too.
Right.
So we use our intelligence to protect ourselves just as much as we use our muscles. And the sex instinct, it's about so much more than just the physical act.
Exactly. It's about connection, creativity, emotional fulfillment.
Now, Fortune says our emotions are basically the subjective experience of those instincts in action. So pleasure is a sign that an instinct is getting what it wants. Pain signals frustration. And fear is what we feel when we anticipate that frustration.
Right. So every time you feel an emotion, there's an underlying instinct at play.
It's like they're the driving force behind those feelings.
And she notes how earlier psychology, they focused a lot on reason and logic.
Yeah.
But modern psychology is starting to understand that it's actually emotion driven by instinct that's the real powerhouse.
It's calling the shots. Okay, let's look more closely at the self-preservation instinct. What does Fortune say about this one? She describes it as this deep clinging to life, this fundamental will to exist.
That's present in all living creatures.
Okay.
And for simple creatures, it's pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
It's about finding food and avoiding danger. But for us humans, it gets a lot more complicated.
Yeah, all those things we do to earn a living, it all boils down to self-preservation.
Right. And it's inherently selfish. It's focused on your own well-being first.
Looking out for number one.
Exactly. And Fortune says concern for others often only comes into play when their well-being benefits you in some way.
Right. So it's not purely altruistic.
She gives this interesting example of hunting laws that protect animals during breeding season.
Right.
Now, those laws, they're not really there for the animals' sake.
They're there to ensure there's a steady supply of animals for humans to hunt in the future.
Right. So it's still ultimately about self-preservation.
It's enlightened self-interest.
Exactly.
But she also points out that this self-preservation instinct can be influenced by the other two big instincts, right? The drive to reproduce or the need to belong. And sometimes those can become so strong that a person might even risk their own safety or even sacrifice their life for others.
Right, like a parent who risks their life to save their child.
Exactly.
Or a soldier who throws themselves on a grenade to save their comrades.
Now think about this. In a lot of animal species, you only see self-preservation and the reproductive instinct. But for those animals that live in herds, like us, the social instinct develops, and it actually changes how self-preservation works. Because your survival then becomes tied to the survival of the group. The herd itself takes on the role of protecting and adapting.
Right, it becomes a collective effort.
So this applies directly to us as social humans, right?
Absolutely.
The suffering and chaos that happen in places after a big social breakdown, like after a war, really shows how vulnerable individuals are on their own.
Right, we're not meant to go it alone.
And how much we need that group, that herd.
We've evolved to rely on each other.
And Fortune says, as humans have become more socialized, there's been a shift From individual self-preservation to group preservation.
It's like our survival instinct has expanded to encompass the whole community.
The instinct for nutrition and the instinct for self-preservation, some psychologists separate those out. But Fortune lumps them together for all intents and purposes. And she stresses that in highly developed people, self-preservation isn't just about staying physically alive.
Right. It's about more than just food and shelter.
It's about protecting your sense of self, your personality, your need to express yourself. If you repress those aspects, it can lead to this feeling of being incomplete, like a part of you is missing.
It's like you're not fully living your truth.
Okay, what can go wrong with this self-preservation instinct? What are the diseases of it?
Well, Fortune explains that it comes from that sense of individuality, right? And it drives you to assert yourself, to claim your space in the world.
Which is healthy, right?
Absolutely.
To a certain degree.
It's necessary for getting your needs met and for finding your place in any social group. But like with most things in life, it's a balancing act.
Right.
You need enough self-assertion to get what you need.
To stand up for yourself.
But not so much that you disrupt the social order, you know?
Yeah.
You don't want to become a tyrant.
So what happens if there's not enough self-preservation?
Fortune says that can often point to deeper psychological issues.
Okay.
Sometimes a subconscious conflict about which self to protect.
Okay.
Leading to protecting neither. So it's like this self-sabotage almost.
And what about too much self-preservation? What does that look like?
That can develop in people who had to fight really hard to establish their individuality,
Okay.
especially early on in life.
Yeah.
So they become almost overly focused on protecting themselves.
Okay.
And she also points out there's a strong link between your desire to live, your will to live, and your overall vitality. You know, it's often observed that people who lose hope, who lose their desire to keep going, they become much more vulnerable to illness.
It's like their life force is draining away.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to the reproductive instinct. Fortune describes it as nature's mechanism for making sure a species doesn't die out.
Right.
And the way we experience this instinct is through all the emotions and feelings related to sex and attraction.
Right. It's the driving force behind all that.
She suggests that the desire for sex usually shows up when your basic survival needs are met. It's like an overflow of energy once you feel safe and secure on a fundamental level.
You get the basics covered, so you can start thinking about other things.
Procreation, yeah. But she cautions us not to just focus on the physical part.
Right. There's so much more to it than that.
Because sex also has very important emotional and mental dimensions. It's not just about producing offspring. It's also about that desire for rejuvenation, for feeling alive and stimulated, for connecting with another person on a deep level.
Right. And if you only focus on the physical act when you're trying to understand human behavior, you're missing a huge part of the picture.
You're not seeing the whole story.
Absolutely.
So she really highlights how interconnected the physical and psychological aspects are. Physical sensations can trigger emotions.
And vice versa.
Right.
Your emotions can affect your physical body.
Even just thinking about sex can cause physical changes. And physical stimulation can trigger emotional states. It's a loop.
It's a feedback loop.
Okay, Fortune says this sex instinct forms this massive network of connected ideas in your mind, second only to the ones centered around your sense of self. And its energy can flow into any thought or activity that's even remotely related to it.
Right.
Influencing how you dress, the kind of home you want, even your career ambitions. It's